2. You got me? It's me. Check 1, 2. All right. All right. Another one for me is Mario Kart. I will say, son, so I decided that I was going to get better than him. And so I put a lot of effort, probably too much, more than I'm proud of, into becoming awesome at Mario Kart. And now he won't play with me. So, I'm like, hey, you want to play Mario Kart? He's like, I'm kind of busy. So we're continuing our series here, Like a Good Neighbor. And today, actually for the next 2 weeks, we're going to kind of touch on the topic of politics, because to be a good neighbor, I think it takes a different way of looking at politics, and one that we don't see very commonly in our culture. And so don't turn me off. I'm going to do my best not to call you out on any of your political, but just know I probably disagree with you on a lot of things, and that's okay. For a very long time in this church, we've been very diverse politically, and we've made room pretty much for everyone, no matter what their political persuasion is. And that might actually seem like something unbiblical to you, but we valued unity more than we valued a political platform or party affiliation or candidate affiliation. And generally, when I preach about this kind of thing, I will not endorse anyone. In fact, the people that I would endorse probably won't be the people that you would like anyway. So I'm just to let you know where I'm coming from, put all my cards. Soft libertarian, and so I probably would offend both Republicans and Democrats equally if we started talking specifics. But what I really want to do is just talk about what it looks like to be a Christian in the political climate that we find ourselves in, which we're going to have to endure the next sort of, well, I don't know, could be next 20 days, or it could be the next 6 months. We don't know exactly how this is going to look or how it's going to turn out. But I do think there's a clear mandate for us as Christians on how to live in the environment that we find ourselves in, and to just kind of get some things straight in our mind before we find ourselves in kind of the tension of whatever may come or may happen. And I don't know how you feel about the way things have been going. I'll put all my cards. I'm 44, so I've been through only a few elections. Only, whatever the last 20 years or so have I really paid attention to politics, and have I voted? And has that been something that I've been, sort of passionate about? By the way, if you ever want to talk one-on-one, I'll be happy to talk about any issue that you feel like you'd like some advice on what the Bible has to say about it. I'll generally always try to guide you back to the Bible and show you kind of maybe how I think about it, given that I'm coming from a Christian worldview. And I don't mind doing that one-on-one with anybody about anything. However, when we're talking about what we're going to talk about in church, I like to keep it broad, and I want to really talk about what it looks like to be a Christian in a polarized world. And I think that's the thing that I've noticed over the last 20 years or so. I guess it probably was polarized, but I just didn't feel that way. I felt like you could have conversations openly with people, and it didn't feel like at the end of the conversation, if you didn't agree on something, that you were like an enemy. I think what we've done recently, it feels like it's kind of ramped up over the past few elections, is that we've kind of gotten to a place in our culture where we want to make enemies out of other people so that we can vilify them, so that we can shut down their ideas, so that we can stop the conversation, so that we can dig into our corners and fight with people. And it's easier to hate people and to make them enemies when you think what they are espousing or believing is evil. And I think that's kind of what's happened in our culture, that there's been this polarization that continues to get further and further away. And Christians oftentimes found themselves sort of in the middle in a culture, and kind of I think, vacated that middle area, that open area, that conversational area, to a place where now we are either enemies of people or we are with people. And that, to me, is a really sad thing that we've kind of gone through in our culture. that we are either for or against, that we are either enemies or we're on the same team. And I think even we've gotten to a point now where with our media, it's really hard to understand what we're looking at or what we're taking in from other people, because even now if you platform somebody who doesn't necessarily have the right viewpoint, you get feedback from that that's really negative. So it's like, hey, we had a conversation with somebody that we didn't agree with. Now we can't even have those conversations. And so we've taken our media and gone that way. So it's either media from one side or media from the other. And honestly, some of those media outlets are just being honest about it. They're like saying, hey, we're coming from this perspective, or the other side, we're coming from this perspective. And it's harder to find information that you can trust. It's harder to find people that are willing and open to have conversations about things. It's harder to find people who don't see you as their enemy if you don't agree with the entire platform that they agree with. And so oftentimes we can do a couple things. We can either just completely pull out of all those conversations and out of that landscape, and some of us have, and I'm not saying that's the worst thing in the entire world, but I mean, even me, I know I saw this year coming, and I kind of felt like I just needed to not see some of the stuff on social media that, from that perspective. And I want to say somewhere along the way, I believe Christians decided in their walk with Christ that if we just believe the right things, then we could act on our politics instead of acting on our Christianity. That something happened there where we started to act out on our politics, and we believe, we would say, like, I believe in Jesus, I can check that off, I've got my, I'll be in heaven someday, I'm one of the believers, I'm in the family here, but I'm actually going to live out a political lifestyle or political agenda, and that's going to be the thing that's most important to me. And I think we've done kind of a damage to Christianity's place in culture and in society. In fact, I know that if you talk to younger people, what they will say to you is that oftentimes when they hear the word, like, for instance, evangelical, or a word that describes kind of a traditional Christian, that oftentimes they think that that means that there's a political bend that's intertwined into that viewpoint. And we've done damage, I think, to younger people's viewpoints on what Christianity is because of how we've handled politics in our culture. And it's something that I think we really need to take a look at. And we'll talk about it today here. But there are also major problems when we decide that one side or the other is the Christian's way of viewing or dealing with politics. And in fact, one of the major issues that we have that sometimes we don't want to look at is that you have a white evangelical church that believes one thing, and you've got a black church mostly believes a completely different thing, and we have two different ends of our own culture, of our own Christian culture, that are like antithetically against each other. In fact, you've seen a lot of pastors start to bring in those conversations. And I know this was something I didn't quite understand, but one of the churches that I worked at in the past was very political, and they used to put out like voter guides, and they used to have conversations. The pastor would get up and talk about candidates a little bit, and would kind of like lean into talking about how some candidates are the one way to go, or the other people are not the way to go. I know there's a pastor who I follow, who I have a lot of respect for on social media, that talks about very specific things that are going on in Minnesota all the time, and very specific candidates and very specific bills. And I think, personally, when I see all that stuff, I think that he's kind of missing the boat. I think sometimes he's showing that he's on one side or the other and telling us that all Christians should be in the exact same place. I think Christians can be in many different places, and that we should have diversity of how this looks. And we saw this hugely in COVID. Maybe you didn't feel it, but as a pastor, as a staff member at a church, I felt it. I felt it significantly. I know that when we were making decisions, and by the way, I don't think we made every decision correctly. All right, so I'll just say that from the beginning. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had. We tried to back that up with data. We tried to have conversations to make sure everybody understood what we were doing and why we were doing it. But it led me to comment that you're showing fear in the decisions that you're making, and you're doing things that I don't agree with, and I think politically that there are things that I think you're aligning with the wrong side of the conversation. To which I said, hey man, this is an unprecedented issue. And we have no idea what the right thing to do is here. We're asking the Holy Spirit for guidance. We are thinking about our neighbors. We're doing everything we can to both honor the people in our church and honor the people outside of our doors. And it's incredibly complex. And even if I would say in that conversation that I don't think we're getting it 100% right, but we're doing what we feel led to do, it still led to people leaving our church to go to another church that had a different political viewpoint. In fact, I even had a conversation with somebody one time who said, I just can't go to my small group anymore. Is there any way that you could put me in a small group that has all, and I just won't say if it's Republicans or Democrats, but ask me if I could align everyone in their small group with their viewpoints, and then they would stay. To which I was saying, hey, this is a great opportunity for me to grow my church by pulling people out of other churches who aren't necessarily making all the same decisions as us. So the political culture that we're in right now, where we cancel each other, where we make enemies, theme of unity going through here. And so what I want to say from the very get-go is like, I'm not looking to vilify anyone, and I don't want you to be my enemy. I would much rather put my political persuasions down so that we honor unity in our church. And I want you to hear that there's room for you, whatever crackpot, crazy ideas you have, and there's some good ones out there. I'm not sure we went to the moon, right? Like, did that happen? JFK, we could talk about, right? There's room for you, because those things are secondary issues here at Pursuit. It's not something that we want to divide over. That your politics is not something that we want to divide over. If you get into a conversation one-on-one with somebody over a coffee, or you invite them over to your house and have dinner with them, great. Debate, have fun, have a conversation. As long as at the end you realize this is my brother or sister who I'm part of a family with, right? And that's what we've always tried to honor and to keep in the front of any time we have these conversations. And I think one of the things that we miss here is that when people in the first century began to be called Christians, it wasn't right away. We see the first mention of Christians kind of like in Acts. And oftentimes when people are called Christians in the very first iterations of that, they're being called Christians because it's almost like a slur, like a little bit of a derogatory usage of it, almost degrading to call someone a Christian at that time. It had a negative connotation. And people were called Christians because what was most important to them was a different king and a different kingdom than the one that in Jesus' day, it was very contentious, and it was very polarized. And when Christians came on the scene, they just didn't serve any of the options that were there. They served a new king, they served Jesus, and they served his kingdom. And people saw them acting differently and realized there was something different about them. And here's a couple examples. We could do a real deep dive on this some other time, but there was a common practice when you had a baby that you didn't want to have to do what was called exposure. And you would take a baby out to a certain area and you would leave it there until it died on its own. And that was a common thing in the Roman world. If you didn't have a way to take care of that baby, or you didn't want that baby, you could just go and expose the baby and the baby would die, and that would be the end of it. Well, Christians were like, we're going to start picking these babies up. We're going to take these babies. We're going to adopt these babies. And so they just started picking them up and taking them. And there were actually conversations going back and forth between Rome and governors of what are we supposed to do? The Christians are picking up all the exposed babies, right? I mean, the Christians were known for their love feasts, where they would honestly just invite every single person in the community who had need, who needed to eat, who needed a community of people, and be like, come be part of our family. Let's do communion together. Let's honor Jesus in this meal, and let's just have a meal together. They would call it love feasts. There were, Roman governors who complained to their higher-ups, what am I supposed to do about this? They're taking care of the needy people, and this was a job that we used to do.